Okay. All right, so let me just move on very quickly here. Just a bit of backstory about how we got to this webinar in particular. So this is sort of based on a community-based research project focused obviously on the impacts of COVID-19 on our local food system. This project was collaboratively framed up with members of the Future Food and Farming Working Group, the Peterborough Food Action Network, and the Food Access Network. And you'll hear more about all of these various initiatives throughout the course of this presentation. The research was funded by Trent University's Rapid Response to COVID-19 funding stream, a funding stream very generously opened up by the university to try to demonstrate some leadership in this area of trying to figure out how we sort of move through COVID in the months and years ahead. The formal piece of the research involved thus far 2 surveys, a general population survey to basically try to sort of solicit people's experiences with food throughout COVID-19. And then a survey of organizations as well involved in food access work. And again, you'll hear more about this throughout the course of this presentation. I'm going to now pass it over to Akia, and she can take it from here. So Akia, you on the line?
Hi everyone, my name is Akia Ajaman, and it gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome on behalf of the Trent research team, Dr. Michael Claessens, Marianne, and myself, Akia Ajaman. So we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Michi-Sageg, Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. So we have some special guests who will speak on our topic that it's about the impact of COVID-19 on food security in our community. My favorite quote is from Barack Obama that says that change will not come if we wait for some other person or time. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, and we are the change that we seek. So we have Lauren Kennedy, who is a registered dietitian with Peterborough Public Health. Her current areas of focus are food literacy, food systems, and food insecurity. Lauren works closely with local and provincial networks, including the Peterborough Food Action Network and the Ontario Dietitians in Public Health. We also have Pat Learmonth, who is the Director of Farms at Work, a charitable regional project working for healthy and active farms in Central Ontario. Pat served as the Environmental Farm Plan Representative and Workshop Leader for Peterborough County for 7 years and co-founded the East Central Farm Stewardship Collaborative. She's past chair of the Peterborough and the Kawarthas Economic Development Agricultural Advisory Committee and is co-chair of the Sustainable Peterborough Working Group on Food and Farming. Pat holds a BA in Environmental Studies at Trent University and a degree in law at the University of Western Ontario. We also have our third guest speaker, who is Joëlle Favreau. For the past 25 years, Joëlle has been involved in anti-poverty work with a particular focus on food security and equity-related issues. Joëlle is the manager of Nourish, a food security collaborative led by YWCA Peterborough Haliburton in partnership with Peterborough Public Health and Gleans. Nourish offers a variety of integrated programming designed to engage community members in a journey dedicated to cultivating belonging and food security at the household and community level. We also have Sainte, who is a community advocate. Sainte is a community advocate living on low income, working as an essential volunteer worker in food security during COVID. She's involved with Ashburnham Garden Group and Nourish Emergency Food Boxes, and also Peterborough Gleans. We also have Stuart Batt, who's also from Grow Change. And I'm once again thankful that we are all here to share knowledge. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Akia. So I think next, we have, I think Lauren is up next. Is that right, Lauren?
Yep.
Great.
for inviting me today. Maybe just if you could make sure you're on mute, that's great. Thanks so much. So I'll be speaking from my perspective as a public health dietitian and from my involvement with the Peterborough Food Action Network. So COVID-19 has made an impact across our food system and across our world. And specific to impact on public health nutrition work, much of our usual work, such as food literacy, cooking programs, was put on hold for a period of time, with some staff shifted into support of the local COVID-19 response. But I want to focus today on some of the health and nutrition impacts we're seeing provincially and on a national scale as well, that have also been impacting us locally. And I'm going to highlight a few of many. So when we think about the impact of COVID-19, one of the pieces is around health inequity. So COVID-19 did not have equal impacts across groups. It has highlighted inequities and health inequities that existed before the pandemic. And so health inequities result from unnecessary, avoidable differences that are unfair and unjust, related to different factors, social determinants of health. And we've seen that there is potentially higher risk and severity of COVID-19 infection connected to these factors, such as gender, socioeconomic position, like income, race and ethnicity, occupation, indigeneity, homelessness, incarceration. But we've also seen that the impacts of COVID-19 public health measures have also been unequal. And so, for example, locally, we heard that when many community services moved from in-person to online or phone delivery, we saw some of those living on low incomes without internet and phone access faced with additional barriers to accessing services. Another thing we've seen is decline in mental health. And so we've seen a decline in self-perceived mental health in Canadians even between April and May. But again, here we see an unequal impact. So for example, while about a quarter of Canadians reported fair or poor mental health, over half of those with long-term conditions and disabilities reported worsened mental health compared to before the pandemic. And when we look at food insecurity, so household food insecurity is also a serious public health problem that has increased. And Statistics Canada found that it was significantly higher in May of 2020 of the pandemic compared to 2017 and 2018. So household food insecurity is when people don't have enough money for food. And it makes sense that we're seeing more of this with employment loss and precarious incomes during the pandemic, because we know that the root cause is inadequate incomes. So when we look at lessons learned, a few of many lessons learned, we've been learning as we go. One lesson is just around the importance of nutrition and food security and healthy food systems for overall health and well-being. So many of our concerns right now, whether it's physical, mental, social well-being, are deeply connected to food and being able to access healthy, affordable food that meets individual and cultural needs. And so drinking water and eating a variety of nutrient-rich vegetables, fruit, whole grains, protein foods, this all supports a healthy immune system, as well as overall physical and mental health. And we also know that cooking and eating meals together is also beneficial. And so food and the way we eat are important and are components of the bigger picture of our health and well-being. And so COVID-19 infection itself is one factor of health, and health is much bigger than that. Another thing that we have found is the need to balance meeting immediate needs with long-term solutions. throughout the pandemic, there's been a huge emphasis on emergency food. So things like food banks, meal programs, with a great deal of funding directed towards food. But research shows that the solution to food insecurity isn't actually food. The solution to food insecurity isn't actually food, it's about income. So it's an income floor, such as a basic income guarantee. But unfortunately, focus on emergency food can further entrench the myth that it can fix the problem of food insecurity. While it is often necessary to focus on immediate needs, we can't lose sight of long-term solutions. There's also the importance of collaboration as a community that we've found. So many initiatives to support those impacted by food insecurity came together overnight because of strong community collaboration. And another example is the COVID-19 and food access for vulnerable populations group. So this formed from the Peterborough Food Action Network and brought together and brings together community advocates, food banks, meal programs, researchers, social services, public health, community-based organizations working towards food security as well. And as we take steps forward, we need to be asking what the community needs and understand and involve those who are impacted by inequities, mental health, food insecurity, and other social determinants of health. And we need to think about bridging the gap and reducing inequities in all of the policy, programming, and community work that we do. While we do this, we also need to be thinking about how do we mitigate the risk of COVID-19 transmission and programming. How can we complete risk assessments and use creativity and problem solving as we do this? And moving forward as well, how can we continue collaboration as a community working towards systems change? We have a wonderful community and there's some amazing work being done. And in spite of the challenges, we have come together. And so this is going to be critical to continue as we look to apply what we've learned and work towards resilient, healthy, equitable local food systems. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lauren, for your discussion. And now we're going to turn it to Laurie Sainte. Thank you so much. We're going to have Laurie Sainte come up next. Are you there, Laurie? Yes, you go ahead, Laurie. Oh.
All right.
You want me to speak now?
Oh, yeah. Laurie, go ahead. You can,
okay,
sorry.
Because I can't hear Marianne.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. So, yeah, Laurie, take it away. Thanks.
Okay. I wanted to start from the personal and then move to my work in the local food security during COVID-19. I started this year in a very high personal stress level due to families and friends having serious illnesses and being hospitalized. So when COVID started, I was definitely even seriously higher stress and some mental health issues. I have friends who I support as a caregiver. I'm also a parent, and not that they live with me. I live alone, so you know that, and I live on disability. I live in a building that is for supportive housing. I was trying to prepare for COVID, but I didn't have enough money to actually prepare the way everybody else did, running out, getting food or getting toilet paper. And I was, because I was so stressed out, I wasn't eating properly. And I would just eat what was in the fridge that was easy to just grab, something that I didn't have to prepare at all. I noticed that. I tell you, part of the reason why my mental health was not very good was a friend in this building, another tenant who I was close to, meaning I had contact with. Actually, she's a nurse, and she was afraid that she had COVID. So it put me into isolation, and I really thought that I had it. I really thought that if it wasn't her, then it was a PSW in the building who's working with everybody else. So I really was freaked out. And it wasn't until I got some support, and also that turned out it was not COVID, that I was able to calm down some. But I have had a few fears that I came in contact with people who were ill. And most of them turned out it was not COVID. Some people couldn't get tested because they didn't have any travel history. So I was lucky that nobody actually had COVID. And so most people who are living on low income, we are living in some form of shared accommodations. And that actually puts us at risk. It's very hard to isolate. And when I have low income, it was hard to purchase the sanitizers, the cleaners, the masks, all those things that I was supposed to be using to keep myself safe. I have some physical issues. I already had them before COVID. I'm on disability, and a lot of my tests that I was supposed to have in Toronto were canceled, and they have not been rescheduled yet. I ended up in the hospital twice already during COVID with digestive issues. With some prayer and some encouragement, some support, I was able to reach a point where I said to myself, what is really important? And what can I do? So I turned from being afraid to actually doing something. And that is something that's important to me. Obviously, my family and my friends, my children, my sister, they're all important to me. And I stay connected to them, even though most of them don't live here. The one thing I realized is I can grow food. I come from a rural background. I was a farmer's daughter. I know a lot of stuff as a child. So it was important that I actually grow something. And I have piles of seeds that I had been collecting. And my son is living out on a farm south of the city. So this is before we opened up gardens. And I got permission from the landlord that we could actually grow food. So my son, who was laid off, he actually was involved in this also. So it gave me a chance to actually pass on some of my knowledge to my son also, which makes me feel good. So here I became an essential volunteer worker. We opened Ashburnham Garden with protocols, and we started doing gleaning. And I got involved in the Nourish emergency food boxes. Because I was quite anxious about my exposure to several people, being the garden, the people who are gleaning, and people in my building, I've been tested 3 times because I was so anxious. All of them were negative. I am at risk due to having multiple illnesses, and I live in a high risk supportive housing building, which has been partly in lockdown. And I believe we're probably going into another bit of a lockdown again. I've used up all my credit. I am maxed out. I was buying food online and going and picking it up. I was buying my own. I was buying another tenant's in this building, the person who I thought had got COVID, and the person outside of this building in her own house that I was trying to caregive for. So I'm unable to do that now because I don't have a credit card. I maxed it out. This summer, I've been learning about herbs and herbal teas, and I've been drying a lot of that herbs, and I presently have a lot of muscle pain, so at times I've been not being able to prepare some of my vegetables, and I've been trying to find easy ways of baking your squash and cooking the cabbages and things like that. I've been trying to extend my garden since some of my plants are still growing, and I've done a lot of seed saving. I'm trying to adapt to the changes that are happening. I try to keep connected with my friends and my family. And support. So that would be CMHA. I keep a routine. I have a schedule every day. I try not to watch the news too much because that causes me more anxiety. I've taken a few free webinars on various topics, and I've been trying to prepare for what may be coming. I'm sorry, I've written a bunch of papers, so I'm reading them. I wasn't I wasn't going to the food banks, particularly at the first of the pandemic, because we were being told to isolate. And I felt that it wasn't safe because we were being lined up in lines and we're all there. Some of the food banks I have been to now, and some of them we do walk into. Some of them, it's totally outside and it feels safer. Personally, I know that CMHA is going to help me if I get sick, whether it's COVID or not, because somebody would have to come into the building and have the access to come into the building and give me my food. But she'll do that if I have money. But by the end of the month, I won't have any money to be able to give her. And I believe that we still need emergency food during this second wave and during the winter.
Lori, thank you very much for sharing with us. That's really great. I think you raise a great point about this tension between emergency food and longer term system changes that Lauren spoke to. I want to throw it now to Pat Learmonth to talk about her perspectives from her organization, Farms at Work, and some of the work that they've been doing. So, Pat, do you want to share your screen, or would you like me to share mine?
Sorry about that. I went unmuted to my presentation. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Michael? Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. Are you able to see my screen now?
No, I don't think we can see it yet, Pat.
Okay, you know what, Michael? How about if you put the presentation on up for me? I think that's just going to be a faster solution right now.
Sure, yeah, just give me one sec here.
It's up on my screen, but clearly the share screen that when I hit that button, it did not share the screen.
Okay. There, how's that?
Can you do hit slideshow from the beginning?
Technology. Sorry about this, everyone. Let me just. I'm having a similar issue, Pat. I'm seeing the full online, but not.
That's strange, isn't it? Well.
Oh, you know what, Pat? I am seeing we are seeing your screen.
Oh, maybe it just took a while.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can see it properly?
Yes.
Okay, I think there must have been just a delay. Okay, I'm sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so I just want to thank Lori for her presentation, because that was, extremely important to hear what she had to say. And of course, I'm going to come at this topic from a completely different angle altogether and talk about the organization that I run called Farms at Work during COVID-19. That is a bit of a play on words, in case you don't notice. So the first question is how COVID has impacted our work and the people that we advocate for. So I'm gonna look at this in three different sections. And the first thing I want to mention is just that this this very interesting conversation that has happened around COVID, where all of a sudden we've been defining essential services, and I think that it was really interesting for those of us who work in the broad food system space to find that whereas in the past I would have, for example, I would have spoken publicly about food being a matter of national security and about the fact that everybody is ultimately vulnerable if they don't have access to food. And some of that access has to do with finances, and other times access to food can have, you can have all the money in the world and you still can't access food. And so we've talked about this in terms of national security, for example. Now, during COVID, all of a sudden we had this terminology come forward around essential services, and farms found out that they were essential services. I don't think that they had thought about themselves specifically in that way before. And it is kind of interesting when you've got thousands and thousands of small businesses and they're all of a sudden they're essential, and they have, it seems different than when you think about the fire department or the hospital or some of these other essential services, to think about all these thousands of small businesses being essential. And for us at Farms at Work, and for our colleagues across the province and across the country and North America who are in the kind of space that we work in, you know, we were now able to look at ourselves and say, okay, well, this is a different way of describing what we've been trying to say for a very long time, because what we're actually doing is supplying support, providing support for essential services. And so I think that this has been extremely helpful to us because we have always known how important the topic was, but now it's almost as though we have a word to describe that. So second, I can talk about impacts on farms as being sort of the public that we serve, if you want to put it that way. And what's interesting about that is that it's a topic we could talk about easily for 2 hours, because here's a diagram that kind of shows you what the farming community in Peterborough looked like in 2016. I mean, these are all the different farm sectors that we have and the percentages of farms that are doing these kinds of activities. And needless to say, we cannot look at the farm community and say, this is how farms are, or this is what farms do, or this is how farms feel, or this is how farms have been impacted. There's no single way of describing what has happened in the farming community. So, and we haven't surveyed specifically our local Peterborough community, farming community, but I did reach out, and I have of course spoken to many, many people over the past few months, and just recently reached out just to see what kinds of responses people had when I asked that question. So what's really interesting is that in talking to, for example, beef farmers that are selling through the regular commodity system, so they're not selling to customers locally, they're shipping their animals. And in talking to our local dairy farms, for example, and beef and dairy are fairly good sized chunks of the circle that you're looking at right now. They basically said that there were mild impacts that more had to do with social distancing from day to day, like when the milk truck came, you couldn't go close to the milk truck driver, but that on the whole, they're pretty well feeling as though it's business as usual. Now, they're not saying that personally. I'm talking about what their business is like, not, I want to be clear about that. As soon as you start talking about some of the farmers that are doing direct sales to consumers in our community, then it's a completely different story. And again, it depends on the specific kind of products that they're selling. But I sort of have identified 9 different things that, or 8 different things that I could put my finger on that happened over the course of this period of time, and that impacted those kinds of farms that we're trying to sell directly, more or less face to face within our community. So the first thing that they experienced was a huge increase in demand, because when people started seeing they were having trouble or they were uncomfortable going to the supermarket, or for whatever reasons, their normal sources of food were becoming a little bit more challenging, they turned to the local farm community in droves. And it all of a sudden occurred to a lot of people that, holy mackerel, maybe we actually have some food that's grown right here and that we could access. And so any farms that had product available at that time, which is an odd time of year, March, but they found that their product disappeared very quickly. There was a tremendous demand. And then what happened was that all of these farms kind of went into this period of uncertainty and disruption because their normal marketing channels were subject to some question. They really didn't know what was going to happen with farmers markets. They didn't know if they were going to be allowed to have farm stands. They just didn't know if these things were going to open and how they were going to open. And in some cases, they were asking themselves, like, what do I plant? What do I grow? What do I produce this year? And what am I going to be able to sell? So that was really tough because the spring was the time when they either had already made some of these decisions or were in the process of finalizing those decisions and had to make very fast decisions, and they couldn't really be sure whether they were going down the right road or not. So many of them were engaged at that point then in saying, okay, well, if I'm not sure what's going on, I'm going to have to just create new marketing channels for myself. You had farms that were frantically creating social media channels that were frantically creating online websites and stores. And they were also getting together with other farms and creating new collaborative groups for marketing together, which of course in the end is probably a very positive thing. But it was extremely stressful. All of this was very stressful. The need to make those decisions, to actually do that extra work. And then on top of that, of course, build in all of these safety procedures. And a lot of the safety procedures were sort of changing in real time, and nobody really knew what exactly to do in March, April, and May before everything started to solidify a little bit. Some farms that really just could not figure out quickly enough how to change their marketing channels have been very seriously impacted from a financial point of view, certainly. If they didn't have enough access to internet or familiarity with digital tools, maybe money is a problem, and even manpower to do all of these things so quickly. So some of these farms clearly had very negative financial impacts. The other thing that affected farms, of course, was the restaurants closing. So any kind of sales to restaurants just simply terminated and resulted in a loss of sales. The farms also found that they were dealing with shortages. So for example, I heard from an egg farmer locally that one of the big problems was that egg cartons were short in supply. And so, who would have thought of that? But that's a pretty big problem if what you're doing is trying to package up eggs for sale locally. The cost of the egg cartons also doubled. There were also those shortages of chicks, and there were shortages of seeds in some cases. And because everybody was deciding that growing food would be a really good idea this year, which one can understand, it took the system by surprise. And so farmers in some cases were sort of faced with these unexpected shortages in terms of things that they required. There's been a lot of talk about manpower on farms, and what's interesting, I think, in our community is just to understand that the majority of farms don't hire people onto the farm. They're family businesses, and for the most part, statistically, it's the family that is doing the work. We I think had something like a total of 9 offshore workers in the county this summer. And
we're just about out of time.
I'm out of time.
Just about. If you just want to wrap up, that would be great. Thanks.
Oh boy. All right, that's really tough. Okay, so the impact on us of all this was that we basically went into high gear, and we had to start to do social media campaigns, and we developed a new website over the course of the summer called Peterborough Farm Fresh. Basically, we just went into high gear, and we didn't really have the manpower or the access to funding to do these things, so they were mostly done based on volunteer work, which has been really challenging for us. We were very stretched, and at this point, we're really concerned about program failure because of volunteer burnout, and the funding is still not really in place that recognizes the importance of the kind of work that we have been doing. because we're not literally delivering food to individual people. So we're kind of hopeful that that's going to change, but we'll see. In terms of our future plans as an organization, which was another question that you guys had asked, we're doing strategic planning this fall. We're definitely fundraising to maintain services, especially the programming that has just been started during COVID and that needs to be maintained now. And we're trying to build the impact of that programming. In the longer term, we'll see what our strategic plan outcomes are specifically, but traditionally we have supported new farm enterprises for more than a decade. We do a lot of farmland protection and stewardship, and what we want to do is to continue to help build community integrated food and farming systems for our local community. And I say that because it needs to be a collaborative effort, and I have to agree with all of the lessons learned and so on that Lauren spoke about, and I think that collaboration is absolutely key. The food system is very complex and it requires a range of partners, and we need to be working together and not behind closed doors so that we can all get to where we want to go in terms of having a complete food system. And finally, in terms of lessons learned, I guess my silver bullet is just that crisis management is very, very challenging. And I think that if we can see that if we now have a clear idea what essential services are, what they look like, then I think we need to build towards permanent support for them so that we have resilience in the future and don't have to do this again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat, for bringing this perspective from producers. And our next speaker is Joëlle Favreau from Nourish.
Hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you today. What I want to do first is tell you a little bit about Nourish. Nourish's goal is to find ways to support everyone in the communities where we work in becoming able to feed themselves well and with dignity. So the seemingly simple goal essentially outlines our three integrated areas of programming. The first one is definitely the one that generates the most uptake from participants. It focuses on access to healthy food. So under that category, we run our food box program, our community market in Curve Lake First Nation, community gardens, community dinners, and Nourish Dollars, which help us connect local farmers and people living on low income. The second most popular area of programming deals with food literacy. That's what is highlighted by the word well in our goal. We offer programming designed to help participants learn new skills or strengthen their food skills in the areas of growing, cooking, and canning. Our final set of programming connects to the dignity part of the goal. There we offer a series designed to help participants learn how to become peer advocates, peer navigators. It's where people start to feel more comfortable working with one another and where they begin to engage more systematically in conversations about the root causes of food insecurity in particular. This is also where we do our advocacy work around basic income. Our tagline is belonging through food. And indeed, we deliberately look for ways to help people connect with one another throughout our programming. So the first thing that we did when the pandemic started was to actually cancel CD Sunday. And that's symbolic because that's usually the marking of the beginning of the growing season. Then when the lockdown was declared, the first thing we did was to get in touch with participants in our program to see how they were doing and find out what they thought would be most helpful to them. They told us overwhelmingly that their main challenge was to be able to access good food without putting themselves at risk. Many participants in our programs face chronic illnesses and are vulnerable to COVID. So this feedback led us to explore what we could do in partnership with Peterborough Public Health. We decided to transform our food box program into an emergency food box. We knew though that we didn't have the capacity to support everyone in our community who was facing food insecurity. The numbers were simply too high. And as Lauren mentioned, in May, StatsCan noticed that nationally there was an increase in food insecurity of 39%. So what we did was to craft core criteria to vulnerability to COVID, secured funding, and reached out to agencies working with vulnerable community members. And so then the demand for emergency food boxes grew so quickly that we soon had to offer weekly emergency food boxes. We also try in every food purchases we make to connect with local farmers. But as Pat mentioned, it was challenging for many farmers to be able to supply such quantity for our food boxes. We were also very cognizant of the fact that in spite of people saying we were all in this together, the pandemic was actually highlighting and amplifying the cracks in our social safety net. Fearing that access to emergency food programming was going to dominate conversations around food, we also doubled our efforts around advocacy and pushing for basic income. Studies have shown that it is one policy with clear track record of significantly reducing rates of food insecurity. So painfully, though, we had to stop many of our programs in the early stage of the pandemic, our community dinners, our cooking and canning series, as well as our peer advocacy series. To summarize, I would use a metaphor. I feel like we started to get engaged in some kind of clunky dance that focused on only two areas of our programming: access to healthy food and some advocacy. So the lessons learned for us is that evaluation of our programming has shown that our hands-on gardening, cooking, and canning series are essential ingredients in helping participants gain a strong sense of agency and a desire to learn more about ways they can get involved. Not being able to offer this series really undermined our work. In particular, it removed a critical tool in helping participants start to imagine new possibilities. Some of you on this call will be familiar with former English Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher announcing that there is no alternative. In other words, she felt that we had reached a point where there was no longer any meaningful alternative to neoliberalism, to the idea that the market was the answer to all our questions. This mindset is even more deeply anchored in our collective psyche right now than when she uttered that phrase. What I mean is that most of us have a harder time to really dream new dreams and imagine new possibilities. And that includes many of the participants who are involved in our work. By emphasizing emergency food access, the pandemic is reinforcing the illusion that food is the answer to food insecurity. Looking for ways to change the conversation around food insecurity is challenging at the best of time. While we have seen basic income gain more traction in the past few months, it hasn't yet become a policy. Greater support is being given to emergency food. I really hope that this will not undermine the need for a radical new approach. So with regard to our future plans, we are exploring new models of service delivery that create opportunities for meaningful connections. Right now, we are testing sessions and ideas about having a hybrid service, a model delivery service. We are allowing people to come virtually if that's what feels better for them and if they have the tools to do that. But we work with a lot of people who don't have the technology and they want to be involved in present. So we are trying this model, and so far it has been working well. And we feel that if we can create that kind of approach, we might be able to address some of the barriers that participants are facing. We are continuing collaboration with the groups that we reached out to, and are looking, because we are entering a second phase. So looking at how that's going to impact our food boxes, for instance, but we're also trying to develop series and training around digital literacy, because so many people are facing barriers, not only in accessing the tool, but in gaining the knowledge to participate. And now the digital world is so dominant in our activities that we want to find a way to reach more participants in being able to participate that way. So I think that in summary, I would say that maybe I feel like we are still engaged in that clunky dance. Maybe it's a little bit more graceful, but right now there's an increasing anxiety about what is going to happen. And I fear that we might get off balance once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joëlle, for your words and reminding us of the importance of imagination for sustainability. Next, we're going to have Michael talk about the research project that we've been working on. He's going to do the first part, and I'm going to do the second.
All right, great. Thanks, Marianne. So we'll be very brief with this. I know that we're a bit over time, so I'll be very, very quick here. Most of what we have to say will, I think, resonate and be resonant with you know, what Pat, Lori, Joëlle, and Lauren shared with us. So what we found in the surveys that we did, some broad key themes that are emerging is that food really was front and center on people's minds throughout this pandemic. This is demonstrated by the extent to which people adjusted their food behaviors, and we heard a lot about that so far. It was a key strategy, actually, by which people attempted to sort of adapt and withstand, you know, the global pandemic. I think people really used food as a strategy in that context. Importantly, these challenges weren't necessarily felt equally across all demographics. So, low income and already marginalized eaters have been impacted, you know, disproportionately throughout this pandemic. Again, we've heard that from our speakers. And we've also seen an increase in sort of mental health issues and concerns as people struggle with a variety of food-related anxieties. Very quickly, just one graphic here. So this shows the extent to which people were worried about food during the pandemic. So about a quarter of all respondents said that they worried about food sometimes prior to the pandemic. That went up to 50% during the pandemic. But you can see that so from the LGBTQ plus community, women, Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, the level of concern is actually higher than it is for you know, the total average population. So again, that's just showing some of the disparities in the impact. In terms of how people adjusted their food behaviors, so this image on the right side of your screen with the colors there, I understand that there's a lot to take in there, but what I want to point out is that this is the ways in which people accessed food by income before and during the pandemic. So the top bars are before. I don't know if you can see this is before the pandemic, and this is during the pandemic. So you can see here, before the pandemic, there's a kind of very well-defined kind of pattern of food access. And during the pandemic, that changes quite dramatically. You can see it's a lot messier as people sort of shift and adjust to how they were accessing food. We can see there was quite an increase in people going to grocery stores. These are the light blue lines here. There was a pretty dramatic decrease in restaurants eating. That's the yellow bars. So you can see before the pandemic, lots of restaurant eating. During, not so much. Grocery store orders is the green. That's, you know, many more people ordering groceries online. Farmers markets, quite a marked decrease. You can see across all income demographics, quite a high level of participation in farmers markets. During the pandemic, not so much. It becomes a lot messier and in fact, quite a bit reduced. And many people started growing their own food during the pandemic. Just a bit on the sort of some kind of contradictory approaches, I guess, to shifting food behaviors during the pandemic. Some people, it seemed, sort of doubled down on their support for local food, and they felt very comfortable going to farmers markets, etc. Others not so much. Other people went to kind of a more kind of industrialized diet, I'll put it that way, feeling more safe going to, say, big box retailers, as they're called, feeling that the kind of sanitized sort of sterility and convenience of these places allow them to do all their shopping in one place and leave. So whereas before they may have gone to local shops, to purchase, meat from one place and cheese from another place, etc. So, different approaches, different strategies by which people have been trying to navigate the pandemic. Similarly with health impacts, for some, the global pandemic has meant a significant increase in stress and anxiety about food. Job losses and unemployment have meant people have less money for food. For some, worries about the virus have led them to a kind of more industrial diet, as I said, of highly processed food, so-called dead food. And they notice that this has had an impact on their overall mental health and well-being. So while they say they feel more comfortable, say, eating something that's been highly processed and sanitized, they at the same time may realize that that's not the healthiest food to be eating, but they do it out of fear for the virus. Others have said that they've never had so much time to cook and prepare healthy, wholesome food for themselves and their families. Other people are taking more time to sort of shop around and find the best kinds of food. So for some, the health impacts have in fact been positive within the context of this pandemic. I'll let Marianne now speak about the organizational survey.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So Michael talked about the general survey, and I'm going to talk about the 25 responses that we got from various organizations. 17 of them spoke about doing food distribution or food access. And you can see on this chart that of the activities they spoke about half of them had to do with food access or food distribution. Can you change slides? In terms of programs, the changes that we saw happening from before COVID to during COVID, as you know, there were a lot of closures, suspensions, restrictions to programs, and moving programs either online or to other means like phone. Definitely an increase in focus on food access and shifting ways of doing food access. For example, through driveway pickups and by delivery. And distribution, another focus on distribution of other resources like PPE and water. And definitely among many organizations, there was less volunteer presence. A lot of volunteers weren't able to or were asked not to participate. Organizations identified their needs in the survey. During COVID, the big one was funding, although some organizations said that there wasn't anything that they required at the time. But beyond COVID-19, organizations reported that sustainable funding for sustainable solutions was really key. Having more human resources or staffing and basic income was also identified. Next slide. Staffing, we saw very little change in staffing levels among organizations, but certainly an impact on staff themselves in terms of mental and emotional challenges, feelings of helplessness of not being able to help the people that they'd normally work with, and workload increases from, especially from the added work of pivoting and doing programs differently. Volunteers were feeling very disconnected. They were feeling very much like they were losing out on the social aspects and the meaning attached to volunteering, and feeling helpless as well. One person said they felt sadness at not being able to do more. Next slide. Organizations reported on how the participants were doing. Some said it was hard to even know how they were doing at this time, but definitely they saw more food insecurity, income insecurity, and other vulnerabilities. And again, there's that disconnection, mental and emotional challenges. They saw more overdoses and an increase in suicidal behavior. In fact, one person said the issue of food insecurity in many ways is taking a backseat to the social isolation among people that we serve. Next slide. And finally, organizations spoke about their perceptions. And one of the biggest perceptions is that there's a real tension between what their purpose is, what they're trying to do in the community, and what they need to do right now during COVID-19. So one organization said people are socially isolating, but our organization has usually encouraged people to not isolate. So there's that real tension between trying to bring people together, but still keep things safe during COVID. Another observation that's been made has been brought up before as well, is that there seems to be more understanding of the existence of food insecurity and certainly more willingness to respond at a community level. But there's also this further entrenchment of a charity model, a loss of focus on food literacy and capacity building, and a real focus on the need to address the inequities that have been coming to light and that have been exacerbated through COVID. Next slide. So that's a really brief overview of what we found in our research so far. Going forward, we're going to be doing some more analysis and breaking it down by groups to find out how particular groups have experienced food during COVID. We're going to be doing some interviews with low-income individuals to hear their stories and their specific experiences. We'll also be doing a farm survey to gather more stories and understanding of how producers are experiencing COVID-19. And then eventually bringing everything together in a community report that we will be distributing across the community. So that, I think, is it for the formal part of our presentation. I'm going to turn it over now to Stuart Butts from Trent's Growing Change Initiative so that he can make some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful, informative, and nuanced presentation. It was quite emotionally challenging in certain areas. I think for many of us, it'll be a bit of an eye-opener about the actual reality of and the interconnectedness of so many challenges. I think if I stood back and said, what did I just hear? And what I just heard was that in general, COVID-19 has made a bad situation worse. But however, it has brought out the best in quite a number of people in the community. And it has brought about, it sounds like, a greater level of collaboration and a greater level of understanding of the issue in a general sense in the community. But I would have to say that, you know, a really deep understanding and an understanding of how to approach it from not just a community level, which is really what we're focused on, but also a number of speakers mentioned a more societal challenge around the whole issue of fairness and equity in society. Our intent at Grow Change, which is really just a notion, which is basically very much to galvanize the community for the long term. And we were working on this Grow Change initiative before COVID. It's for over a year now. And of course, many of you have been working at it for very lengthy periods of time. But in terms of organizationally and thinking about how to make an impact, certainly on the Peterborough and surrounding territories, we thought that providing a nexus between the educational community at Trent University, the socially active community in the communities of Peterborough and surrounding communities who we hope to expand it to, and the farming community, which is terribly important. And Pat did speak a bit about that, but I do think that their voice should be heard in a similar sort of session to understand not just the short term, but the long term challenges of maintaining a farming community that is capable of supplying the local community through thick and thin. And I think that would also be a very interesting and probably emotionally draining conversation, because their challenges are as equally diverse, and on top of which you throw in the weather. And certainly, I think finding a way to enhance the collaboration, make the very best of the good intent of everyone. Obviously, finding financial resources on a stable basis. You know, I'm hearing from all of the participants and anybody engaged in this area generally, funding is the underlying challenge, and an awful lot of energy is consumed in, you know, processes of looking for funding for projects, and if some kind of an umbrella sort of situation could be formed either from the outside providing financial sustenance to the community, or from within the community putting together a single face. I think that sort of a thing could be very useful, impactful, and it needs to be understood that it's necessary, because even though this, we might hope the COVID situation will pass, as it's very clear, the underlying fact of food insecurity is an ongoing and has been a long-term ongoing issue, which has to be of concern to, I think, everyone, not just from the point of view of fairness, but also from the point of view of maximizing the available resources in our community, for the benefit and enjoyment of all. I think that I think the most important single thing that I heard was the deep appreciation of the collaboration that came together so quickly. And obviously it's a very ad hoc sort of situation. And clearly there are so many individual stories on the needs side and also on the supply side. And to put together some kind of a network or program that fits all is probably never going to happen. But I think having all the pieces come together in an understandable puzzle, and all understanding what their part is in the overall food supply to our neediest program is, I think that's, that knowing who is and who can do what and where and how and what they need is probably a very good roadmap that we could aim to write out and to create as part of the framework for understanding what we could do with the notion of growing change, of improving food security, and getting rid of the issue, and frankly, ideally, of food insecurity. I mean, the notion that people are actually worried about getting food, and presumably the food providers, the people in the middle who are assembling these boxes, that needs to be a more certain process. To think that you can't be fed is an appalling idea. Knowing how to get access to the food and getting the best food you can should be the desideratum. Get rid of the notion of insecurity and food security, how it's supplied. I'm rambling on now, and I think there's actually an opportunity for an open mic situation. I'm sure there are other people who have questions and comments about the presentations that we've had made. And so, Michael, can I throw it back to you to see what might come from the audience or from the other participants?
Yeah, for sure. I see we have about 18 minutes left. So, but yeah, I mean, I think now that we should just open it up for broader discussion. I'm going to stop the recording now.